What's up, guys? In this video, I want to talk about 5 ships who could use some buffs but probably won't be receiving any in the near future, and how I would buff them while keeping their identity if I were the God King Emperor of Azur lane. Every like on this video is a vote for me to become the new director at Manju. I want to start by saying that the identity of the ships that I'm talking about is purely what I infer from their kit, because I don't really know anything about their real-life history. Also, I won't be talking about the same ships I usually talk about in related topics, like Janus and John Bart. First up is Halford. She is supposedly bugged right now and her planes deploy from where she is, and often can't actually attack the enemies, but let's just pretend that's not an issue, because even without it, she's still not that great. Looking at her kit, she has a very balanced loadout with decent to good stats across the board, but there's nothing that quite stands out apart from the seaplanes in her AA slot. Unfortunately, the seaplanes don't do enough damage to compensate for the overall mediocrity of her stats. All of her skills and barrages are similarly unimpressive. The result is that she is an unremarkable destroyer who doesn't stand out much in her damage output, tankiness, or fleet support, even if her planes weren't bugged. This might be fine for a normal event SSR, but as one of 5 research ships that are introduced once a year, on top of being very cute, I think that she deserves a little better. What I would do first and foremost is make her kit synergize better with anti-heavy armor fleets, as that is what her seaplanes excel against. Heavy armor fleets cannot make use of her 15-second debuff, so I would add that if she has a seaplane equipped, it becomes at the beginning of battle and every 20 seconds after. This way, the vision debuff would synergize much better with the rest of the fleet. I would also make it so that the debuff also increases aviation damage taken by 8%, in addition to cannon, because she's a USS ship. What are we doing here with a minor cannon buff for the faction with the most carriers, on a ship that has a loadout biased toward heavy armor? It would be optimal if it was also torpedo damage, similar to Mogador's debuff, but making it cannon and aviation without torpedo seems to fit better with the strength of USS ships and makes her different from Mogador. If after some playtesting it seemed a little bit too powerful though, then I would make it only apply to rockets and bombs, which is the USS specialty, and makes her even more different from Mogador. Then, for her second skill, I would also make it so that the 2 effects from her airstrike launches both activate rather than being on rotation. Her airstrike has a cooldown of approximately 20 seconds and no preload, so the skill has a relatively long cooldown for the minor effects that it provides. A smokescreen and 4% heal every 40 seconds? I'm pretty sure she wouldn't be even close to broken if the effects were combined. With these changes, I think that it would make her pretty amazing against heavy armor bosses with high evasion, like Taiho and Nagato Meta, but I'm still not sure if she would be able to replace either Z52 or Kazagumo for better results. But at least there would be a conversation to be had, since her buffs would be stronger than Z52's, and her survivability would be slightly higher than Kazagumo's. The way she is currently, she's given about as much consideration as an event purple. And then, as for what her fate simulation would be on top of these changes, the damage on her all-out assault is extremely poor, so I would probably double that, and then have the torpedo, anti-air, and damage reduction buffs from her second skill apply even when she's using a seaplane. Moving on, the next ship I would buff would be Essex. Her kit is actually very solid and coherent, but she just needs some modernization, in the form of an augment perhaps. Fun fact, she came out at the same time as Taiho, who actually got her augment over 2 years ago. Yeah. Looking at her kit, I believe that her identity is air superiority, and she is more suited toward campaign with her anti-air skills and parallel torpedo barrage. The thing that I would likely change is her second skill, and I would make it so that for each Eagle Union carrier or enemy plane shot down, she gains 6% aviation and anti-air, stacking up to 30%. This would mean that she would be able to quite quickly reach her maximum aviation in plane health stages, without it being a burden on your fleet composition. Once fully stacked, I would also give her a 20% flat damage bonus, which would only put her more in line with modern carriers. On top of that, I would make her second slot a fighter or dive bomber flex slot, which would give her more flexibility and usage in the Chapter 15 support fleet, but wouldn't necessarily make her ceiling much higher. The third ship I would buff is Bremerton, because she's frickin' Bremerton. First of all, her first skill should just not be tied to RNG. It's way too outdated and cringe. Her second skill should also be modernized so that, in the front position, the damage reduction is for the entire battle as opposed to just 30 seconds. And when not in the front, she should gain a second or special anti-air mount in addition to the anti-air buff, which would not make her remotely close to being anywhere as good as the likes of Guam, but would at least make her a hell of a lot easier to use. The next ship, and you guys are probably going to think you know what faction she's going to be, but don't get too excited. This might be where I switch things up. The next ship I would buff would be Vittorio Veneto, but it seems like Sardinia as a whole has been retconned from the game, so I'm not going to waste my breath on that. So the next real ship I would buff if I were given executive power over the development of Zerin is Bristol. There are quite a few problems with her kit, despite it having a lot of potential on paper. First, instead of pointing her lantern just directly forward, it should instead be underneath an enemy. Priority target would be preferred, but even random enemy would be a huge upgrade over what it is right now. It should probably be priority targeted so that it's not indirectly nerfed for manual play though. Her second skill is essentially useless because you would probably only consider bringing the summoner class for anti-air and not damage as far as destroyers are concerned. She should increase the anti-air stat of summoner class ships by 40% instead, which sounds like overkill until you realize Z1 has this buff, but way crazier for all Ironblood destroyers. Additionally, when an enemy is illuminated twice, they should receive extra damage from all sources, not just the summoners, because the condition takes at least 40 seconds, which is utterly ridiculous, especially when you consider the fact that the lantern isn't even targeted at the moment, so the payoff should be higher as well. With these buffs, she would be a really good generalist debuffer, contributing about as much against bosses as Kazagumo, depending on team composition and evasion rate, and a fun anti-air option, but far from the best. However, her lack of personal damage in bulk would still hold her back from being totally absurd. The last ship I would buff is Plymouth. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Okay, I didn't mean it. Who I would actually buff is Jeanne d'Arc, who has no use anymore after Eldritch got her retrofit. What I would do is make it so that her skill 1 buff when she's burning apply to all French ships, which would be more fitting of her real life story. It would make her especially good in combination with Mogador and Alsace, but that 20% firepower buff is the only relevant effect for Alsace, and her overall damage contribution would still be far below that of Plymouth's, meaning that she could be a top tier pick if you're using Alsace plus another strong French ship, but not strong to the point where she's just gonna be dominating rainbow ships left and right. Okay, I hope that was kind of interesting. I try to avoid ships that just need a simple buff to their numbers. Some other options I considered were Ognivoy and Victorious. But Ognivoy just needs to be a real healer if that's her identity, and not 1% of nothing every 10 seconds, and then Victorious just needs to deal more damage, so that would be a bit boring. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.